that was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed.
Gia Gunn is known for opening doors, serving glamour at DragCon, and serving puss anytime she sees an opportunity. So it's no secret that one of the overarching themes behind why so many people are obsessed with Gia is because she seemingly has no filter. I mean, even her TikToks will go viral every couple months because she'll say the most cutthroat things, without even realizing how entertaining it is to the people that watch it. Essentially, if we're talking about queens with a polarizing personality, she fits the mold perfectly. So let's get into why when Gia Gunn goes off, nobody's safe. But before we start, this video is sponsored by Raycon. If you want to experience the best audio quality when listening to your favorite music or scrolling through social media, then you need to make sure to have good earbuds. That's why I want to introduce you to Raycon's everyday earbuds. Raycon's products offer the same premium audio quality as their leading competitors, but at half the price. With over 3 million of their pairs of earbuds sold to date, Raycon has become a favorite among listeners. And now is the perfect time to check them out because they just launched an upgraded model of their best-selling product. Some of the key features of the new everyday earbuds includes ergonomic design that ensures a comfortable fit for all-day wear, multi-point connectivity that allows you to pair with 2 devices at once, making switching between your phone and laptop seamless. It also has active noise cancellation, and it's produced in a variety of different colors. My favorite ones being the green earbuds, because hey, I love green. The best part is that you get a 30-day happiness guarantee, so you can buy with confidence. Don't miss out on this incredible deal and click the link in the description to head over to buyraycon.com/greengay and get 15% off your first order, which includes free shipping. Get this offer while you still can. Now let's begin. Gia's first time performing in drag was in January 2010, after being told by her future drag mother that she seemed like she'd make a good drag queen, which ended up being true, because for the next 3 years, Gia continued to perform, as she realized that part of her destiny had always been to find drag. When looking at her audition tape for season 6, it's a really well-paced video that encapsulates the brand of Gia, way before she even knew what that brand would look like. This would also be the first time that she ever auditioned for RuPaul's Drag Race, so it seems that casting producers fell in love with her almost immediately. Now, season 6 filmed in the summer of 2013, and to Gia, it made sense that competing on a platform like Drag Race was the next logical step in her career, so she was gonna have to give it her all if she wanted to succeed. Gia's entrance into the workroom is to this day one of the best ways a queen has introduced themselves to the audience. It had everything going for it. The background music was fitting, the camera shots were eating, but most importantly, the outfit in itself was a serve. Specifically the giant hoop purse that was actually inspired by a Chanel purse that almost became a thing around the 2012 to 2013 era in the fashion industry. Regardless, in the same way that Gia bringing this giant purse was avant-garde, Gia's personality was the same way. Top that with the fact that she was now on her first ever TV show, her ego was through the roof, she was feeling her oats, and all she had to do now was win the crown. For season 6 episode 1, Gia was among the first 7 queens to enter the workroom. Their challenge was to create an outfit inspired by a popular TV show, with the materials provided on their assigned box. Gia gets assigned Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and makes a decent enough outfit that earns her a safe placement, meaning that yes, everything was going according to plan. The first queen to be eliminated had already went home, and now she was gonna get to meet the other group of queens that she'd be able to torment. Nowadays, split premieres have become the normal format to start off a season, although if you had to decide whether you'd want to be part of the group that competes on episode 1 or episode 2, which one would you choose? To me, being part of the first episode always gives the first group a slight advantage, because not only do they get the audience's attention first, but they also get to feature one extra look than the rest of the other queens when they wait in the workroom to meet them. Then again, by the end of the season, you do sort of tend to forget which original group each of the queens belong to, so maybe it doesn't matter all that much in the long run. But anyways, at the end of episode 2, we get this cute little scene where the 2 rival groups are sizing each other up, as if they were in an old Midwestern film. While it seems that most of the queens were just playing into it for the drama of it all, you could tell that Gia was fully taking the confrontation seriously, by reading each of the queens to filth that dared to raise their voice against her. It's important to note that Gia was only 23 years old when she competed on season 6, which is hard to believe given how sure of herself she seemed to be. I mean, this is a queen that was bantering neck and neck with Bianca Del Rio, a queen that had been in the industry for over 300 years. So clearly, Gia wasn't one of the queens to be messed with. Yet that's part of what created a magic within Gia, because she lived in her own world, and in that world she was a star. So it made sense that she would act like a diva, getting into arguments with some of her fellow cast members. For episode 3, Gia takes part in the acting challenge where the queens had to parody old horror films. This is where we start to see the parts of Gia's skill set that hindered her success in the competition, because she goes down to have a lot of difficulty with acting out the scene. Although something that I do really like about this challenge is how it was directed by both RuPaul and Michelle Visage. I mean, nowadays we do always see Michelle engaging in the challenges, but I don't think we see Ru doing it as often as she used to. The runway theme for the week was Best Drag. Gia came out in this bodysuit where I guess the headpiece must have been the centerpiece of the whole look. In her audition tape, Gia described her drag package as having a lot of avant-garde costumes. So it's really too bad that we wouldn't get to see that many of them. I actually feel that we never got a proper showcase of what Gia's drag style truly was. I mean, yeah, Gia tended to follow traditional expectations of drag more in line with the pageant world, but it's clear that she also had a lot of creative takes with some of the themes. Regardless, by the time we get to episode 4, we are in the Rusical. Gia gets assigned the role of a comedy queen, which is a sharp contrast to what she considers herself to be. And that's a queen that takes her craft seriously. Despite all odds though, she actually does a pretty good job in the challenge, even though she does go on to play safe. At this point, while she wasn't the front runner, where she was dominating and wasn't untucked, getting into arguments with a couple of the other queens that she could not stand. For example, she gets into it with Milk because she didn't like Milk's drag style, or that week in particular, Milk had gone on the runway as a pregnant woman for the theme of Tony Awards realness. After Gia was throwing some shady remarks, Jocelyn Fox then jumps in and calls out Gia for sounding ignorant, but Gia claps back at her for looking like a dumpster. It's actually such a great set of interactions among the queens, but nevertheless, challenge-wise, Gia was now starting to fall behind in the competition, and the pressure was slowly starting to get to her. By episode 5, we get to the Snatch Game, which was a pretty significant moment for Gia's storyline this season, because not only did she go home by the end of it, but she also goes on to become the first queen to be eliminated on Snatch Game twice on 2 different seasons. After failing at her Kim Kardashian impression, she'd end up in the bottom 2 against Laganja Estranja, the one queen that she was the closest to in the competition. Something that I always liked about the Untucked for this episode is that Laganja and Gia have a moment backstage where they separate from the rest of the group. Gia hypes Laganja up by telling her that this is the moment that counts. It's actually pretty theatrical, and it really made me view Laganja and Gia's relationship from a different lens when I first saw it. Regardless, they needed to face off to each other as they lip sync the Head to Toe by Lisa Lisa. What I like about this lip sync is that Gia actually does a good job keeping up with Laganja. I mean, she gave us a reveal, some cute dance moves, but ultimately she was outperformed by Laganja just by a small margin. Ru announced that Laganja had won, which meant that Gia had officially been eliminated from the season, placing 10th. Now obviously, Gia didn't agree with the judges that it was her time to go, as her exit line was, quote, "You're all still dudes," which many took as direct shade to Milk, who was standing there dressed as the male version of RuPaul. Yet it was also the start of a learning lesson where Gia would become more acquainted with different types of drag that exist, so she'd begin to change her mind about it. When the time came for the season 6 finale, Gia returned wearing an all-gold dress. This was during the reunion era where not much time was given to the eliminated queens, especially since it was held at the same time that the finalists were competing for the crown. But we at least got to see her one more time. When looking back at how season 6 turned out, Gia considers it an overall positive experience. After all, it was her first time doing a TV show, and it was a great way to learn about the world of Hollywood. Funny is that shortly after season 6 had finished airing, Gia felt like such a star that she admits she had grown an ego because of it. Which I don't blame her too much for. I mean, she was now a world famous drag queen that was being flown across the country, being booked to stay at 5-star hotels just so she could perform her artistry. Yet along with that, one of the hardest parts that came with the fame and working in the nightlife industry was the amount of drugs that she would get offered all the time, citing that at one point it did become hard to say no. That being said, season 6 aired in early 2014, so there would be a 4-year period till her inevitable return to All Stars 4, which aired in late 2018. Yet in that time period, not only was Gia making bank as a Ru girl, but she'd also end up competing on another reality show competition in South America called The Switch. If you don't know what The Switch is, I don't blame you, but I like to refer to it as one of the biggest missed opportunities in history, because in short, The Switch Drag Race, which is produced in the country of Chile, is technically the first Drag Race spin-off. But despite the production having purchased the format of Drag Race from World of Wonder, the producers of the show decided to completely change everything about the competition to the point where The Switch Drag Race basically became a mix of Queen of the Universe and Big Brother, where they focused heavily on the Queen's singing abilities. So overall, this series was its own separate entity. Therefore, to me, Drag Race Thailand will always be the first real international franchise. But anyways, while season 1 of The Switch consisted of queens from Chile, season 2 would consist of half the queens being from the home country of Chile, while the other half was queens from all around the world, including Gia Gunn representing Japan, Candy Ho representing the United States, and even future alumni like Leona Winter from Drag Race France season 3. When you really think about it, The Switch 2 really was ahead of its time, at least with the concept of gathering drag queens from all around the world and having them compete together, something that the main franchise of Drag Race wouldn't be able to accomplish until the year 2022. The promo trailer for The Switch 2 came out in December 2016, with a really good narrative behind it. The concept of it is that it starts off showing Luz Violeta, the queen who won the first season of The Switch. It then cuts to Gia and the rest of the queens around the world giving their individual reactions, ultimately deciding that they're all going to travel to Chile to compete alongside Luz Violeta, who'd also return for the second season of The Switch. Regardless, that's sort of where the positive points end with this franchise, especially since this would go on to be their last season before being cancelled. Throughout The Switch 2, Gia was pretty ruthless with the way she'd argue with the other queens in the room. Like, honestly, I'd say she was more of a savage than we saw on season 6 and All Stars 4 combined. Essentially, while filming this reality show in South America, Gia had her gloves off and was ready to fight anyone and anything, just as long as it meant she could yell at somebody. Although despite her eventually making it all the way to the top 4 of the competition, Gia isn't too pleased about her time there. While she's obviously grateful for the opportunity to be able to travel to Chile and gain a new experience filming a drag competition in a foreign country, upon arriving to set and being there for a few episodes, she realized that things weren't as it seemed, and that The Switch was a lot different than RuPaul's Drag Race. Let me explain. According to Gia, she took the preparation for The Switch 2 very seriously and was looking forward to trying to win the whole crown. But once she arrived, she saw how the production of the show was actively involved in helping some of the queens behind the scenes, like doing their makeup when their cameras were off, giving them ideas for challenges, or how in a lot of occasions, the queens were given outfits by production to walk out on the stage with, only for the judges to later give them negative critiques on the look that they had no choice in putting together. It's at that point she realized The Switch was an overly produced reality show, but nevertheless, she was there to have a good time and make good TV. The whole situation really created more of an appreciation for Drag Race as a platform, since at least there, the production really did focus on making sure certain aspects of the competition were fair, so their talents really were being showcased properly. That being said, one of the aspects that I did like about The Switch was having all the queens living together in the same house. That of course resulted in some pretty heated exchanges among the queens, especially Gia, who was starting conflict with anyone that would make eye contact with her. Funny enough, it all would work out in her favor as she'd end up outlasting Candy Ho, who got eliminated in the top 8. Meanwhile, Gia made it to the finale with the top 4 of the season, but would lose the crown to Leona Winter. Once the season had finished airing, Gia's plan for the long-term future was actually to remain in Latin America, to sort of solidify herself as one of the bigger fish in a smaller pond. Yet those plans would end up changing when a brand new opportunity would be presented to her just a couple years later. When it was announced that Gia Gunn would be competing on All Stars 4, it was a really exciting prospect. Granted, Gia never made it that far in her original season, but she did go on to become a queen that most fans were referencing in one way or another. Yet despite being acquainted with the competition already, the moment she walked into the All Stars 4 workroom, she felt a bit overwhelmed. I mean, after all, it was her first time back on Drag Race in 4 years, and there was a lot at stake here. Not only did she spend $16,000 on her runway package, but it was money that she had saved up makeup for her transition, which she put on hold due to getting offered the opportunity to come back to All Stars. Originally, when World of Wonder gave the invitation for Gia to return, she saw it as an opportunity to bring visibility to the trans community, so that future trans women and men could be able to compete on the show and feel more comfortable. In that same respect, it was almost as if she didn't compete on All Stars 4 for herself, and instead was doing it for her community, which may have been why she ended up getting in her head so quickly. Regardless, she couldn't think about all that now, because she needed to keep her head in the game, so that she could beat out whatever boogers were going to be joining her in the competition. For the promo trailer of the season, it ends in all the queens being grouped together as they lip sync to the chorus that says, "You'll love us all hail RuPaul." Yet if you really pay attention, you can see that some of the queens like Gia are not moving their mouths. By this point, they had already filmed the season, but it's funny to see which of the queens obeyed production's direction to have them lip sync to the quote, "All hail RuPaul," because some of these queens were so petty that they did not want to do it.
You'll love us all hail RuPaul.
A lot of the tension between Gia and RuPaul was because of Ru's comments regarding trans women being allowed to compete on the show, where she infamously said that it was the equivalent of cheating in sports. Ru has clarified many times that she is a big supporter of the trans community. Yet I think what it largely came down to was Ru just needing to catch up a little bit on what the platform of Drag Race could be in the long run. For example, throughout the early 2010s decade, another argument Ru had for why trans queens shouldn't be allowed to compete was because one of the main underlying themes of the show was the transformation from a glamorous drag queen to an average looking boy, which is why we always got so many moments of them out of drag, either in their confessionals or hanging out in the workroom. Basically, the early seasons of Drag Race strongly emphasized the binary between genders. Gia would go on to get a lot of press for being the first openly trans queen to compete on the show. Yet there's been a lot of debate in the fanbase regarding this topic, since there's several queens that competed within the first 5 seasons of Drag Race that were also trans women. Most notably Kylie Sonique Love, who came out during the season 2 reunion, Kenya Michaels and Jiggly Caliente, who announced their transition shortly after their seasons ended, or Monica Beverly Hills, who came out on the main stage of season 5 episode 2. Then we have the case of Peppermint, who was openly trans in New York City, but ended up coming out midway through the competition on season 9 to her fellow castmates. While we may never know the full truth of how early seasons of the show treated their trans contestants, what we do know is that many of the queens did go through some efforts to try to hide their trans identities, like being told by production to butch it up for their confessional looks, and in some cases, queens stopped taking their hormones in order to film Drag Race. Although nowadays, the show treats trans queens very differently than they did back then, and in fact, they actually want queens to be more open about their gender identity. Some big changes aside from trans queens now being a staple in every season's casting process is that even catchphrases from the show have changed, like the "You Got Shemale" being replaced with "She Done Already Done Had Hers Is," or season 13 where they changed the tagline "May the best woman win" to "May the best drag queen win." There's also a lot more moments on the show that shed a light on the trans communities, and we love to see it. Regardless, going into All Stars 4, Gia did feel some degree of responsibility to try to make sure that she could do her community proud, but things wouldn't go exactly as she was expecting. All Stars 4 was one of the first seasons where almost every queen that walked in had a clear concept of their reality TV persona, with great branding tactics like taglines, merch, music videos, and more. Back then, it was a lot easier to give attention to each queen in the cast, so they knew that any side projects that they released during the airing would get a lot of exposure from fans. Despite the season being the 4th All-Star season, to many, it was really the 3rd All-Stars, as the new format pretty much revived the All-Stars franchise with All-Stars 2. What's more is that it's been theorized that for the beginning stages of All-Stars 4, the main concept behind the season's cast was to have best friends be the overlapping theme. The friends in question being Monet Exchange and Mo Hart, Manila Luzon and Latrice Royale, Valentina and Trinity the Tuck, with Gia's best friend being Laganja Estranja and Naomi Smalls being Kimchi. But of course, this was not able to happen since Laganja and Kimchi ultimately backed out and were replaced with Pheromone and Jasmine Masters. Stacey Lane Matthews was also an alternate for the cast, but was not chosen, although she was invited as a guest for one of the future challenges. When the time finally arrived for the premiere episode of All Stars 4, we got to see the 3rd ever Drag Race talent show take place, where Gia did a kabuki performance which represented her Japanese heritage. The art form of kabuki is actually pretty interesting. Gia herself had been performing this cultural dance since she was 7 years old, being taught by an actual dance master from Japan. So basically, she wasn't cutting corners when she said that she was gonna do a talent show of something that she had perfected throughout her whole life. That same same episode, we got performances like Trinity the Tuck's Tucking Song and Mo Hart's Brown Cow Stunning, both of which would end up being announced as the top 2 for the week. According to Gia, when Ru announced that her talent show had only gotten her a safe placement, she was shocked. Not only did she think for sure she was going to be in the top 2, but the other queens that she expected to see up there with her was either Latrice Royale's flag performance or Manila Luzon's painting sketch. Naturally, she sort of got in her head after this, because if her talent show wasn't enough to earn her a top 2 placement, then was anything she did gonna impress the judges? The same exact sentiment was reverberated in the fanbase at the time, making this performance relevant to this day. I mean, Gia's Kabuki showcase went on to be one of the most memorable acts that we had seen on the Drag Race stage, which is a lot more impressive now, because we've had dozens and dozens of talent shows from all around the world, but this one is still within the top 10. Anyways, just because she hadn't been able to flourish on the first episode didn't mean that all was lost. In fact, Gia spent $16,000 on her drag package for All Stars 4. Most of that money was actually supposed to go towards her transition surgery, but she chose to spend it on outfits because she couldn't let an opportunity like All Stars just pass her by. On All Stars 4 episode 2, the cast is divided into 2 groups that have to come up with their own verses. Gia takes an opportunity to use her verse to throw some shade at the other queens in her team by telling viewers to, quote, not confuse her with those hags. Ultimately, Gia would benefit this episode from some of the other queens doing worse than her in the challenge, such as Pheromone, who was announced in the bottom 2 alongside Mo Hart. One of the more significant rivalries that Gia had on the season was her one-sided beef with Pheromone. To sum up the situation, about a year before filming, Gia used to have beef with another queen in the community. So one night, Pheromone wanted to help Gia repair her friendship with that individual. So she brought her to one of Gia's shows when she was performing at a club. It's after that moment that Gia felt insulted that Pheromone would show up with someone that she didn't even like when she was in the middle of working. Flash forward to All Stars 4, and I guess Gia used that as backstory for why she'd start to zero in on Farrah. For instance, when the queens are all getting ready in the workroom to go out on stage, Gia goes up to Farrah and confronts her about how everyone in her team thinks she's the weakest link of the group. They then get into a small argument that was mostly just shut down by Farrah, saying that she's not as desperate as Gia for camera time. Looking back, Gia doesn't regret the way that she acted on the show, because she considers part of the responsibility of being cast on a reality TV show is to provide editors with good content that they can use to create an entertaining episode, which is a pretty valid point. If you aren't providing entertainment, then chances are that your time may be up soon. That being said, even though she provided countless amounts of material, things would only start to go off the rails from there. Later on in the episode, once Pheromone is announced in the bottom 2, they head to Untuck and begin to deliberate with the top 2 queens. While Farrah's having her one-on-one with Monet exchange, Gia decides to interrupt them and ask if she can speak to Farrah. She begins apologizing to Farrah, explaining that she needed to have that moment because she's worried that Farrah won't be around to hear it next week. This was a very cutthroat thing to do. I mean, don't get me wrong, if I was Pheromone, or even if I was in the room, I'd probably feel really bothered by the way that Gia was acting. But from the point of view of an audience member, it really was a unique way of spicing things up. Yet of course, this didn't come without its consequences, as it only reinforced that Gia was the true villain of the season. When it comes to the edit, Gia isn't one of those queens that blames the production for giving them a false narrative of what happened. In her opinion, most of what was shown was pretty accurate to how she behaved in real life. Although there was a lot more content out there where she wasn't necessarily acting like a villain that wouldn't end up making the final cut of the season. After episode 2 released, the next episode ended up leaking online a full 6 days before it was originally supposed to come out. This means that by the time episode 3 officially aired, everyone had already seen it. Regardless, the Snatch Game challenge would go on to be Gia's ultimate doom. Before they actually filmed the challenge, RuPaul went around the room having one-on-ones with each queen. When it was Gia's turn, apparently during the interaction, she brought up RuPaul's past transphobic remarks about trans queens competing on Drag Race, but the final edit wouldn't show any of it. Something that was really disappointing to Gia, but at the same time wasn't surprising. The conversation allegedly got a little heated, with RuPaul denying that he was ever against the trans community. So the conversation didn't go the direction that Gia expected it to. And after that one-on-one, she kind of felt unwanted, to the point where she heavily considered quitting All Stars 4 right there and then. Yet she would decide not to do this because she didn't want to continue the trope of season 6 queens quitting All Stars, which refers to Adore Delano quitting All Stars 2 or Ben de la Creme quitting All Stars 3. Plus, she didn't want her legacy to be that of a quitter. Regardless, once RuPaul announced her in the bottom 2 alongside Valentina, she has this one-on-one with Manila Luzon where she breaks down crying, saying that she wishes there was another way that she could showcase her art form to the world. world. If you really think about it, this scene really encapsulates how much emotional damage can come from being on RuPaul's Drag Race. Even though most of what we see from Gia is an overproduced personality, this came across as a very genuine and vulnerable moment. It really does make you appreciate how far the show has come since then, where now trans queens like Sasha Colby or Gottmik became really big fan favorites within the general audience. Ultimately though, by the end of episode 3, Manila reveals that she chose Gia Gunn's lipstick, which meant that Gia had officially been eliminated from the season, placing 8th out of a 10-person cast. On All Stars 4 episode 6, we get to the Revenge of the Queens episode, where the eliminated queens got to each have a chance at facing off with one of the queens still in the competition and lip sync for their life for their spot in the race. Gia faced off against Naomi Smalls, which turned out to be a really good pairing, since even though Gia was giving a more high energy take to the song, it contrasted so well with Naomi's more sensual performance. Unfortunately, even though many consider this lip sync to be one where both queens should have stayed, RuPaul announced that Naomi had won the lip sync, which meant that for the second time this season, Gia had been eliminated. Only this time it was gonna be for good. Once All Stars 4 was over and done with, Gia couldn't help but look back at the experience with a little bit of bitterness. I mean, she put her medical transition on hold so that she could buy her drag package for All Stars 4, only to end up going home third. Even the outfit she got made for the show wasn't up to her standards, because there was a lot of issues with the designer she collaborated with. Although something that she did win was the title of one of the funnest villains that we had gotten in the franchise. Although Fifi O'Hara aka Jeremy Carey will always be supreme. So check out this video once you're done with this one. On a lighter note, if you didn't know, Gia made a music video with Alaska titled Latina Mas Latina that she apparently put a lot of effort into putting together, but was ultimately not able to recover financially from it. I remember when this came out and it was honestly such a bop. The narrative of the music video starts off in Japan, where Gia is in a tea house with her geisha apprentices. Yet she also wanted to showcase that she's able to speak Spanish. So once Alaska storms in, she's taken to this Latin event where she dances and parties. If you want to see the full video, which I recommend you do, it'll be linked below. Over these recent years, Gia has always found a way of getting herself into drama every couple months. Whether it was by ignoring COVID protocols throughout the pandemic, calling out queens at DragCon for not serving glamour, or ranking queens on TikTok based on how clockable she thinks they are. Most of the time, fans may not agree with her, but she'll definitely be there to stir the pot. This year in particular, Gia posted on social media that she'd love to be able to return to All Stars to compete so she can give the children what they want with good TV. Even pointing out that she knows that she's had some turmoil against the production of the show after All Stars 4, but she'd love to bury the hatchet. So comment below what you think about Gia's trajectory as a Ru girl. And how would you expect her to do if she did return to the competition? Thanks again to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Please make sure to click the link in the description. I want to take a moment to thank my patrons. In the Elite Pink Squad, we have Matthew Burns, Gay Uncle, Poppers Alberta, Suri Tish, Natasha DeLeon, Las Pothitas, and Cool Gal Nan. In the Gay Squad, we have Julia Baldestor-Tier Zamolochikova. And in the Green Squad, we have Azure, Cayman Rider Furry, Edgar Allan Pup, IJS, Jack Beck, Aaron W, Captain Chaos, Bashir with the good beard, Galeria Gomez, Dea, Sarah G, Scarlet Rose, Boiled Peanut, Kimberly Marin, and our newest member, Max Whale. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please engage in the comments below to help with the algorithm, and I'll see you guys next time.